The dense jungle stretched out like an endless emerald tapestry, the sunlight filtering through the thick canopy above. The hum of insects and occasional cries of birds echoed around Rocky, who moved carefully through the undergrowth. For him, this was not just an adventure, it was a ritual, a retreat into the purity of nature. His well-worn boots crunched softly against the fallen leaves as he inhaled the earthy scent of the forest. Rocky was no stranger to the wilderness. As an animal doctor, his work often brought him into contact with the untamed world, and he relished every moment of it. From an early age, Rocky had been fascinated by animals. His childhood bedroom was plastered with posters of wildlife, and he spent hours watching documentaries about the Serengeti, the Amazon, and the Arctic. But his admiration went beyond mere fascination. He felt a deep connection to creatures of all kinds, a connection that inspired him to dedicate his life to their care. This jungle, though foreign to him in its specific details, felt like home, a place where he could be his truest self. As Rocky continued his trek, he couldn't help but marvel at the ecosystem around him. He paused occasionally to observe a troop of monkeys swinging through the trees, or a line of leafcutter ants carrying their oversized loads. His heart swelled with a sense of wonder that only deepened with every step he took. He was so engrossed in the beauty of his surroundings that he almost didn't notice the faint rustling in the distance. At first, it was just a subtle noise, easily dismissed as the wind or a small animal moving through the brush, but then it grew louder, more deliberate. Rocky's instincts kicked in. He froze, every muscle in his body taut as he scanned the area. The jungle had a way of amplifying even the smallest sounds, and this one seemed to be coming closer. The rustling gave way to a low growl, deep and resonant, that sent a shiver down Rocky's spine. He turned slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Emerging from the dense foliage was a sight he would never forget. A lion, its powerful frame moving with a labored, uneven gait. Rocky's breath hitched. He knew enough about lions to recognize the danger he was in. Even in their weakened state, they were formidable predators. His survival instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet remained rooted to the spot. Something about the lion's movements was off. Its head hung low, its steps faltering. It wasn't stalking him. It was struggling. The lion stopped a few feet away and collapsed onto the ground with a heavy thud. Its sides heaved as it struggled to breathe, and it let out a low, guttural moan. The sound was unlike anything Rocky had ever heard from an animal. It wasn't a roar of dominance or a growl of warning. It was a plea, a sound that carried pain, exhaustion, and desperation. Rocky's mind raced. This was not a scenario he had ever prepared for. The lion's sheer size and proximity were enough to make his heart hammer in his chest, but the vulnerability in its eyes held him in place. Those golden orbs, dull and glassy, seemed to look straight into his soul. Cautiously, Rocky took a step forward. The lion didn't move, its gaze fixed on him. He knew he was risking his life, but he couldn't ignore the silent plea emanating from the creature. With each step closer, he felt a mixture of fear and awe. This was a moment that defied logic, a moment where the boundaries between man and beast blurred. When he was close enough to see the lion's labored breathing and the wounds marring its body, Rocky's instincts as a doctor took over. He knelt a safe distance away, his hands trembling as he opened his bag. "Easy, buddy," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. "I'm here to help." The lion let out another low rumble, its massive frame rising and falling with each breath. Rocky knew he had to act quickly. His hands moved with practiced precision as he pulled out antiseptic, gauze, and a small syringe. Every move was deliberate, calculated, designed to minimize the risk to himself while providing the care the lion so desperately needed. As he worked, Rocky couldn't shake the surreal nature of the situation. Here he was, in the middle of a jungle, tending to the king of the beasts. The lion, for its part, remained still, its eyes following Rocky's every movement. It was as though the creature understood that he was trying to help, that he posed no threat. Time seemed to stand still as Rocky cleaned the lion's wounds, applied ointments, and administered an injection to combat infection. Sweat dripped down his face, but he didn't dare wipe it away. Every second felt like a delicate balancing act, a dance between trust and danger. When he finally stepped back, his work complete, Rocky felt a surge of relief. The lion's breathing had steadied, and its eyes, though still weary, seemed a little brighter. Rocky left a small pile of food nearby, a gesture of goodwill, before retreating a safe distance. As he watched from the shadows, the lion began to eat, its movements slow but deliberate. Rocky knew he had done everything he could. The jungle was unpredictable, and there were no guarantees. But in that moment he felt a profound sense of connection to the animal before him, a connection that transcended fear, logic, and even species. Rocky carefully packed up his medical supplies, his heart pounding as he considered the possibility that the lion could suddenly lash out. The hours he had spent treating the lion had been tense, filled with a mix of awe and fear. The great beast lay motionless, save for the steady rise and fall of its massive chest. Rocky cautiously stepped back, not daring to turn his back completely. His instinct told him to retreat, to put as much distance as possible between himself and the predator. Yet his curiosity held him rooted in place for a moment longer. The lion had shifted slightly, turning its head to watch Rocky as he moved. The animal's eyes, once glazed over with pain and exhaustion, now held a spark of awareness. It was a look that made Rocky's breath catch in his throat. He had treated countless animals over the years, from household pets to exotic wildlife, but never had he experienced a moment quite like this. The lion's gaze wasn't just that of a predator or a wild animal. It was something deeper, something almost human. Rocky slowly began to retreat, placing the remains of his rations on the ground as an offering. He knew the lion's recovery was still precarious. Infections could set in, or the injuries could prove too severe to heal completely. But for now, the lion seemed stable, and Rocky knew he had done all he could. Still, a nagging worry lingered at the back of his mind. What if the lion followed him? What if it saw him as its only chance at survival, and decided to keep him in its sights? As he made his way back toward the trail, the jungle around him seemed both alive and eerily quiet. The usual cacophony of birds and insects had faded, replaced by the soft crunch of leaves beneath his boots and the occasional rustle of distant foliage. Every now and then he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the lion trailing him. But each time he saw only the dense greenery of the jungle, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. When he finally reached the more familiar part of the trail, Rocky allowed himself to relax just a little. He had survived an encounter with one of nature's most fearsome predators and had walked away unharmed. But just as he began to feel a sense of relief, he noticed a movement in the distance. His heart leaped into his throat as he recognized the unmistakable silhouette of the lion standing at the edge of the clearing. Rocky froze, his mind racing. The lion wasn't stalking him. It wasn't crouched low or baring its teeth. Instead, it stood tall and still, its golden mane catching the fading light. For a moment, the two of them locked eyes across the clearing. Rocky felt a strange mixture of fear, respect, and something he couldn't quite name, a sense of understanding that defied logic. The lion began to move toward him, its steps slow and deliberate. Rocky's instincts screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to stand his ground. Running would only provoke the lion, and he doubted he could outrun such a powerful creature, even if he tried. As the lion drew closer, Rocky noticed something remarkable. The animal's posture was not that of a hunter closing in on its prey. Instead, it seemed almost calm, almost grateful. When the lion was just a few feet away, it stopped and sat back on its haunches, letting out a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the ground beneath Rocky's feet. It wasn't a growl or a roar. It was something gentler, something that seemed almost like a purr. Rocky's fear began to ebb, replaced by a sense of wonder. The lion reached out with one massive paw and placed it on the ground between them, its claws retracted. It was a gesture so unexpected, so utterly out of place, that Rocky could hardly believe what he was seeing. Hesitantly, Rocky reached out his own hand, his fingers trembling as they hovered inches from the lion's paw. The animal didn't move, its golden eyes watching him with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. Finally, Rocky let his hand rest lightly against the lion's paw. The fur was coarse and warm, a stark contrast to the raw power he knew lay beneath. The lion let out another low rumble, and Rocky felt a surge of emotion that took him completely by surprise. He had always believed in the connection between humans and animals, but this moment felt like something out of a dream. The lion, a creature known for its ferocity and strength, was showing a level of trust and vulnerability that Rocky could hardly comprehend. It was as though the animal understood that Rocky had saved its life and was now trying to express its gratitude in the only way it knew how. The moment was broken by a sudden rustle in the undergrowth. The lion's ears perked up, and it turned its head toward the sound. Rocky took a step back, his heart pounding once again. The lion didn't follow. Instead, it stood and began to walk away, its movements steady and purposeful. Just before it disappeared into the jungle, it turned back to look at Rocky one last time. Their eyes met, and in that fleeting moment, Rocky felt an unspoken bond that would stay with him forever. Rocky stood frozen in place as the lion approached him, its movements unhurried yet deliberate. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, the usual symphony of chirping insects and distant bird calls, replaced by a profound, almost sacred silence. The lion stopped just a few feet away, its golden mane glistening in the soft twilight filtering through the canopy. Rocky could feel his pulse hammering in his ears, a mix of fear and awe coursing through his veins. The lion's massive frame exuded raw power, but its eyes told a different story. They weren't the cold, predatory eyes he had expected. Instead, they held a warmth and depth that defied every instinct and expectation Rocky had about the king of the jungle. The animal's gaze seemed to pierce through him, as if it could see into the very core of his being. Rocky felt a strange calm wash over him, a momentary reprieve from the overwhelming tension. He noticed the lion's posture, a subtle tilt of its head, the relaxed set of its shoulders. It wasn't crouched to pounce, it wasn't baring its teeth in a snarl. Instead, it seemed curious. The lion lowered itself onto its haunches, a low rumbling sound emanating from its chest. Rocky's breath caught. It wasn't a growl or a warning, it was something softer, almost like a purr, though deeper and more resonant. Summoning every ounce of courage, Rocky took a cautious step forward, his hands trembling at his sides. The lion didn't move, its gaze fixed on him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. He extended a hand slowly, his fingers shaking as they reached out toward the magnificent creature. The lion tilted its head slightly, watching him with an almost human curiosity. Its paw, massive and formidable, moved forward with surprising gentleness, resting on the ground mere inches from Rocky's outstretched hand. Rocky hesitated, his mind racing. Every instinct screamed at him to turn and run, to put as much distance as possible between himself and the apex predator before him. But something deeper, something primal, yet profoundly human, urged him to stay. Taking a deep breath, he allowed his fingers to brush against the lion's paw. The coarse fur beneath his fingertips felt warm, a stark contrast to the cool evening air. The lion didn't pull away. Instead, it let out another low rumble, a sound that seemed to resonate through the earth itself. A wave of emotion crashed over Rocky, fear, wonder, and an inexplicable sense of connection. He had spent years working with animals, treating everything from house pets to exotic wildlife, but never had he experienced a moment like this. The lion's eyes, glowing like twin embers in the fading light, seemed to hold a message, a silent communication that transcended the barriers between species. The lion shifted slightly, its gaze breaking away from Rocky to look toward the dense undergrowth behind him. Rocky turned to follow its gaze, his heart pounding. The jungle seemed alive with unseen movement, shadows flitting through the trees. He felt a sudden pang of unease, his mind conjuring images of other predators lurking in the darkness. But when he turned back to the lion, he saw no signs of aggression or fear. Instead, the animal's posture remained calm, almost regal, as if it were guarding him from whatever lay beyond. Rocky took another step back, his hand falling to his side. The lion watched him go, its gaze unwavering. He reached into his bag and pulled out the remaining provisions, a few protein bars and a small flask of water. Placing them on the ground, he gestured toward the lion, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," he said, unsure whether he was speaking to the lion or to the universe itself. The lion rose to its feet, its movements fluid and graceful. It regarded Rocky for a moment longer before turning and padding silently into the jungle. Rocky watched until its golden form disappeared into the shadows, the rustling of leaves the only indication of its departure. He stood there for a long time, the weight of the encounter settling over him like a warm blanket. As he began the long trek back to the edge of the jungle, Rocky couldn't shake the feeling that he had witnessed something extraordinary. The lion, a creature known for its ferocity and dominance, had shown him a side that defied everything he thought he knew about nature. It was a moment that would stay with him forever, a reminder of the unspoken connections that bind all living things. Rocky's journey back home was unlike any other he had ever taken. The encounter with the lion played over and over in his mind, each detail etched deeply into his memory. As he reached the trailhead and saw his car parked in the distance, the reality of what had just transpired began to sink in. The thought of sharing the story with someone crossed his mind, but how could he? Who would believe him? For weeks, Rocky's mind was consumed by the lion. He couldn't shake the image of its eyes, the way they seemed to hold gratitude, intelligence, and an almost human sense of emotion. He found himself researching lion behavior late into the night, trying to understand what he had witnessed. Yet no article, study, or expert could explain the bond he had felt in that fleeting moment. It was as if the lion had seen him not as a threat, but as an equal, a helper in its time of need. One day, Rocky decided to return to the jungle. The pull was irresistible, a magnetic force drawing him back to the place where his life had been forever changed. This time, he came prepared. His bag was filled not only with medical supplies but also with a camera, sketchbooks, and enough food and water for a few days. He wasn't just returning as a doctor or a hiker, he was returning as a seeker, driven by a need to reconnect with the lion and the wild. The jungle greeted him like an old friend, its familiar sights and sounds wrapping around him like a warm embrace. As he retraced his steps to the clearing where he had first met the lion, he noticed how vibrant everything seemed. The air was alive with the calls of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the faint hum of insects. It was as if the jungle itself recognized him and welcomed him back. Days passed without any sign of the lion. Rocky set up camp near a small stream, spending his time observing and sketching the wildlife around him. He felt at peace, but a part of him couldn't help but wonder if he would ever see the lion again. Perhaps their encounter had been a one-time miracle, a moment meant to stay in the past. Then, on the fourth morning, something remarkable happened. Rocky woke to the sound of soft footfalls outside his tent. His heart raced as he unzipped the flap and stepped out into the early dawn light. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the lion. Its golden mane glowed in the soft morning sun, and its eyes held the same unspoken connection that Rocky remembered. The lion didn't move closer but stood still, its gaze fixed on Rocky. Slowly, Rocky approached, his camera in hand. He knelt at a respectful distance and began to take pictures, capturing the majestic creature in all its glory. The lion seemed to pose for him, standing tall and proud, its presence commanding yet peaceful. Over the next few days, Rocky spent every moment he could with the lion. He documented its behavior, its movements, and the way it interacted with its surroundings. He noticed how the lion seemed to patrol the area, as if it were protecting its territory, and perhaps in some way watching over Rocky as well. When it was finally time for Rocky to leave, the farewell was bittersweet. The lion followed him partway to the edge of the jungle, stopping just short of the main trail. Rocky turned back to look at the animal one last time, raising a hand in a gesture of thanks and farewell. The lion stood tall, its eyes locked on Rocky's before turning and disappearing into the foliage. Back home, Rocky couldn't keep the story to himself any longer. He began sharing his experience through his art, writing, and photography. His sketches of the lion captured the majesty and mystery of the encounter, while his photographs told a story that words could never fully convey. He even started a blog, recounting his adventures and advocating for wildlife conservation. The lion had given Rocky more than just a story, it had given him a purpose. Inspired by their connection, Rocky began volunteering with organizations dedicated to protecting endangered species and preserving natural habitats. He used his platform to educate others about the importance of coexistence, sharing the lesson he had learned in the jungle, that even the most fearsome creatures are capable of connection, understanding, and gratitude. Years later, Rocky would look back on that encounter as the defining moment of his life. The lion had taught him that the bonds between humans and animals are deeper and more complex than we often realize. It had shown him that kindness and courage can bridge even the greatest divides. And as he continued his work as a wildlife advocate and storyteller, Rocky carried with him the memory of the lion, a memory that would inspire him for the rest of his days.